For joining us for the 35th annual meeting of the Prichard Committee for Academic Excellence. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I think we've had some new Prichard Committee members to come, and we've had some additional guests to come. Welcome, and we'll extend even a bigger welcome to you a little bit later on. But this morning, we're going to jump right into business with a press briefing on the statewide release of our 2018 Top 20 by 2020 report. We will first get an overview of this year's findings from our Executive Director, Brigitte Blom Ramsey, and then you'll hear reflections on the findings from the esteemed panel that we've assembled here today. So, Brigitte, would you please come forward?
Bill, thank you. Thank you, everyone, and good morning. And I hope everyone had an opportunity to pick up a packet when you came in, and in that packet you should have a copy of our 2018 Top 20 by 2020 report, which has been embargoed until this morning. So that's the report we'll be referencing in this release this morning. So as many of you know, in 2008, the Prichard Committee challenged Kentucky to move education outcomes to the top 20 in the nation by 2020. Since that time, we've released a report every other year that is a compilation of indicators reflecting the state's performance in education relative to other states. The indicators range from preschool through elementary and high school and into post-secondary. They also include data on education funding. Hitting the top 20 appeared to be an attainable goal in the early years of the measurements, but the most recent report raises serious concerns about the state's progress and makes it clear that achieving the goal will not be possible. A particularly alarming warning bell is about Kentucky's youngest learners. The most recent data puts Kentucky 41st of the 50 states in preschool enrollment, with only 41% of our 3- and 4-year-olds participating in public or private preschool. That's a decline from our ranking of 24th in the original 2008 Top 20 report. Kentucky also has lost ground to other states in the nation in 4th grade reading and math assessments and 8th grade reading. In 2016, Kentucky was 8th in the nation in 4th grade reading. Today, we rank 17th. In 2016, we were 21st in 4th grade math. Today, we rank 29th. And in 2016, we were 19th in 8th grade reading, and today we've fallen back to 31st. Funding for education has also been a constant challenge, with per pupil K-12 funding not budging past 38th in the nation. And while per pupil higher ed funding was in the top 20 in 2008, we've fallen to 30th in the nation, with much of the greater share now being paid for by students and their families. There are a few bright spots, however. Kentucky places in the top 10 for high school graduation and 4th grade science, and still in the top 20 in 4th grade reading, as well as 8th grade science, high school graduates going to college, and associate degree completion. However, even with a strong graduation rate and college-going rate, Kentucky's bachelor's degree attainment for 25 to 34-year-olds still lags the nation at 38th, still lags the rest of the nation at 38th. While we don't know the exact reason for the declines we're seeing, we must acknowledge the impact of the Great Recession on Kentucky's families in the last decade and recognize the additional barriers to learning presented by increased poverty. However, this cannot be an excuse for Kentucky's lack of progress in recent years or in the years to come. We must also recognize that our education system has been in a near constant state of churn for the better part of the last decade. Since 2008, Kentucky schools and districts have been under 3 different accountability models, and teachers have been implementing 3 different sets of learning standards. While any system must be updated to meet modern demands, and disruption is at times necessary for breakthrough progress, growth and sustained improvement require the kind of certainty and confidence that can only come from deepening expertise. To return to a state of positive progress, it is imperative that our state leaders, legislators, and the Kentucky Board of Education stabilize the policy environment and properly resource the system to allow continuous improvement to take root. In addition, we know that nothing matters more than quality teaching to ensure student success. In the coming years, Kentucky must recognize and support the interrelated elements necessary, including teacher preparation, quality professional learning, clear opportunities for leadership, and compensation that attracts and retains top talent into the teaching profession. It's also critically important that we understand our history. Kentucky is midway through an arc of education improvement that started in the 1990s. The success of that first generation of improvement was grounded in a universal policy approach that included statewide accountability and learning standards. While those components are still necessary, future progress cannot be rooted in compliance alone. It is time for a breakthrough that will exponentially increase our progress. The success of the second generation is likely to be a much steeper climb and will require a willingness to embrace the components of complex transformation, such as local empowerment that is aligned to shared goals for student success and an unwavering commitment to evaluating progress. Trust in leadership capacity that we've built as a state over time, and targeted innovation that is driven locally and is responsive to the unique needs of students. Most importantly, we must continue to value two hallmarks of Kentucky's progress to date: collaboration and the belief that improvement is absolutely possible. These are ambitious goals, and Kentucky has never shied away from ambitious goals. But we cannot wait any longer to take the actions needed to put us back on the right course. And to that point, we're incredibly grateful to have honored guests with us here on stage to respond to today's findings. And at this point, I'd like to ask Clay Ford, one of our board of directors from Owensboro, Kentucky, to please join me. Thank you, Clay. And I'll quickly introduce our panelists. With us this morning, we have Dr. Jeff Hawkins, Executive Director of the Kentucky Valley Education Cooperative. Jeff, thank you for being here. We have Sadiqa Reynolds, President and CEO of the Louisville Urban League. Sadiqa, thank you. Dr. Aaron Thompson, President of the Council on Postsecondary Education. Thank you. And Senator Max Wise, Chair of the Kentucky Senate Education Committee. Thank you, Senator Wise. And with that, I'll turn it over to Clay.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, panelists, for your time. We're excited to hear from you this morning. We're all here for the same reasons. We all got involved for different reasons. Brigitte, the information that you just shared with us is very important and sobering, I think, but exciting for us to be working towards accomplishing these goals again. All of us got involved in this committee that we're proud to be a part of for different reasons. For me, I had a young child who was headed into kindergarten, but as a young person in a small community, you get asked to be involved in a lot of different things. And it's hard to decide what to say yes to and what to say no to. But I went to the same person every time when I was looking for advice. And so when I walked into Granddad's, my grandfather Wendell, when I walked into his living room and said, the Prichard Committee is called, most of the time he said no pretty quickly to the things that I was asking about, because he wanted me to spend time with my family and in the business, things that he had missed out on. But when the Prichard Committee called, he didn't hesitate. He said, you need to say yes, and you need to call them back quickly. They have an impeccable reputation, and the work that they're doing is important. So we're proud to be a part of this and looking forward to hearing from you all today to find out how we can be better and how we can improve our communities as we move forward. So it's everybody's business. This has been the core of the Prichard Committee's charge throughout our existence, a statement that resonates today as we consider the implications of the most recent Top 20 by 2020 report that we just heard. We must commit to be in this together as educators, business leaders, policymakers, and citizens of all stripes alike to keep Kentucky moving in the right direction when it comes to educational success for all students. We are pleased to have such a distinguished panel to help us reflect on where we are, where we want to go, and what we want to be doing when we get there. We'd like to hear from each of our panelists and get their general reflections on the Top 20 report that we just heard. So we'll begin with you, Dr. Jeff Hawkins. how is the KVEC, the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative, responding to some of these challenges in the Appalachian region, particularly with regard to building partnerships and innovating to keep education at the forefront of community development?
Thank you, and thank you all for allowing me to be here. Before I answer that question, first, just a little bit of context about what Kentucky Valley is. We are one of 8 educational cooperatives in the state. We serve 22 school districts in rural eastern Kentucky, and we provide supports. We're an educational support agency in that region. And to answer the question, when KVEC began, back in 1969, we'll be 50 this next year, the real purpose that KVEC originated was to provide driver's education for 8 districts in eastern Kentucky. It morphed and evolved over time to become how do we provide training for teachers and for principals and for leaders and for special education teachers. About 10 years ago, we recognized that we need to connect K-12 education to the community in a much more powerful and substantial way. So we began to work diligently to figure out how we connect what we do in public school to the community and how the community can play a more significant role in educating children. We have been very fortunate at KVEC. We've received several federal grants, several private partnerships over that course of time. And we began 5 years ago now the Appalachian Renaissance Initiative. That's what we identified it as. What we wanted to do was invest in the people who worked in K-12 education in our region. And we do that in multiple ways and try to affect multiple elements of that community. We believe that if we tried to do only one thing, it would require a lever so big that we would not have the energy to lift the region if we only did one thing. So we try to create 1,000 different levers and incrementally lift up what we do. So very specifically, we work on personalized learning for children, personalized professional learning for adults. We work on developing the capacity for education, working with technology to extend learning opportunities, and to really get down in the weeds. Every year we offer teachers what we call innovation learning grants, and we are able to fund 120 teachers from our region to do something that they would not have the chance to do otherwise. And that can take on lots of different forms, whether it's reshaping a classroom, growing trout, figuring out how to use 3D printers to make braces for folks who have who suffer from diabetes. We launched a tiny house program because we recognized in our region that there were shortages of housing and housing that was not standard. It was not up to standards. So now every year, children in our region in our VOTEC schools are designing and building tiny homes that are then sold. The money goes back into the program. Those homes have now been sold from California to Maryland and across the country. There's just a lot of things that we try to do within the region to target innovation and try to move people to be excellent and to be remarkable. In the work that we do, we believe that we have to focus on an abundance mentality and not talk about what we do not have, but focus on what we do have. And what we have is an incredibly resilient group of people who have the commitment and the drive to figure out how to make things better where they are. And with K-12 as the catalyst to drive that, we think that we can continue to contribute to the work that is happening in Kentucky and help to make that better. This report, the 20 by 20, really brings to light the urgency that we recognize that we have to work within. And we appreciate the work that the Prichard Committee does to help us focus as a state on what we need to do. KVEC's role is to focus targeted innovation and figure out how we can help to move the state in the direction it needs to go where we are. And I hope that answered the question, at least a bit of it.
Yes. Thank you very much. We appreciate your input. So we're going to move to Sadiqa Reynolds. Thank you for being here again today. Along similar lines, some of the things that he was just discussing, Are there particular challenges that are facing Kentucky's more urban areas such as Louisville? And how do you think both community and school leaders could respond to those challenges in more effective ways?
So first let me say that I am very glad to be here. Thank you for having me. It is nice to be included. I think that, I don't know how you read this report and not talk about more money being invested in education. I appreciate looking at things from a positive sort of, here's what we have, glass half full, but this is much too urgent, and we need to really look at a deficit model as we talk about education in Kentucky, period. Because if the people with the most access among us are doing and producing at this level, you can imagine that urban areas are being even more impacted. So I think that whatever it takes for us to really begin pushing at a state level, at a national level on some funding, really redirecting dollars into education so that we can look at different models, so that we can look at ratios. I understand that there are some studies out there that don't indicate that, you know, if you add another teacher or another adult, not even a teacher, into a classroom, maybe they say it doesn't change anything. But I am a parent. I have an 8th grader and a 6th grader, and for years I've gone on field trips. I've stopped in class. And there is no way that my presence, my ability to be able to sort of redirect this child over here who may be suffering with whatever they're dealing with at home and allow the teacher to do what the teacher needs to do. My presence made a difference. My husband's presence made a difference in that classroom. We have got to think about how we change outcomes very quickly, because I feel like Kentucky is one of those states that thought we could set these goals for 2020 and then somehow everybody else was going to stay the same and we'd be able to catch them. But everybody is trying to improve, and so we have really got to be intentional about this work, and it doesn't feel like that to me. It feels very much like I am in a place where people want to be polite. We want to make sure everybody feels comfortable with the conversation. And the challenge of that is our children are suffering as we do it. And so that's why you have the push, I think, from the business community, because we're graduating young people who are not ready to go to work, who are not ready to go to college, really not ready for much of anything. And I think this Prichard report is really, actually the data, I'm sorry, is really, really highlighting that. So I think this is not the time for us to play nice in the sandbox. It is urgent. Our whole future depends on it. And I have to say this, the Urban League focus, I'll just take a little bit of liberty as my colleague here did. Our focus is jobs, justice, education, health, and housing. Last year we put about 251 people into jobs. That's about $5.5 million in wages. We did a lot of other things too, about a $25 million economic impact, and we don't really count the things we do around education. On the training side, I think it is so important, if we're really talking about justice and really about equity throughout, we have to think about who is doing the training and cultural competency. That is very often missed. Who's doing the training? Who's delivering the training? What are the teachers prepared for what they're going to have to deal with in the classroom, whether it's in a rural area or in urban areas? I think we don't mention that enough. And the other thing I have to say, I hate to do this, race is an issue. And I asked to have the data broken down by race just to see, and I don't know if anybody else here did, but it's worth looking at. So poverty, race, those things are impacting what is happening in our state. And the challenge is that the people we are leaving behind remain here. And so how do we really deal with that? How do we really make sure that everybody is engaged fully? And I quite frankly do not sense, do not have the same level of optimism as some might. And I think I'm in a room with people who are super committed to education, because you've been here since like 8 o'clock and you were here on Sunday. So I think you love education. I think you care about kids. This is not the place for us to act like everything is going to be okay. It's not. We need more investment. We need more money. We need to be pushing on legislative bodies and governors and presidents and everybody to do more. It's not enough. We're not good enough. We haven't been. That's what I think about the report.
Thank you, Sadiqa. You echoed many of the points that Dr. King made last night as well. So I think it's really important what we're hearing today. So we appreciate that.
Dr. King like Martin Luther.
And I also want to thank Senator Wise for being here as well. And so the next question that we have on our panel is, now that the implementation of Senate Bill 1 of 2017 is underway and a new accountability model is in place, how can policymakers respond in order to help schools and communities advance student success? And what are the key points of leverage in your mind?
Thank you so much. First, I want to thank Brigitte and the Prichard Committee for having me here this morning. It's an honor to be here to speak. When I look at Senate Bill 1, the implementation we put forth with that, and when we passed Senate Bill 1, it was one of the largest educational reforms we've seen since CARA to get back to the days of allowing the teachers to teach. Not so much teaching to a test, having students learn to a test for chasing points and things such as that, but trying to get teachers the ability to educate our students and knowing who their students are. I represent a very rural district. I'm in South Central Kentucky. My 7 counties make up Taylor, Adair, Russell, Cumberland, Clinton, Wayne, and Macquarie County. But rural Kentucky is facing many of the same problems as mentioned with urban Louisville. I spoke with Senator Morgan McGarvey the other day. We may be on opposite political parties, but Morgan and I have great discussions all the time. And we say we look back and we look at our districts and say, you know what, it's a lot of the same problems. It's parent involvement, the lack of parent involvement, the drug epidemic, so many issues, poverty, all along the lines of how we can work on these things and tackle them together. But with Senate Bill 1, the accountability measures then is to allow the local school districts to play a role in that district of what's best for them. Being innovative, what works best for those school districts. Now, we're going to see some changes this upcoming session because there's going to be things that are coming out of Kentucky Department of Education with accountability, but that's where, as the legislature, we have to also step up and say, we've got to set the policy agenda here. We are the legislators in the room. We've got to make the decisions that are best. I love the opportunity with Senate Bill 1 to allow companies and industries to work directly on that local level with school districts. I have in Russell County, Dr. Schneider, which is a German automotive company, which is one of the best and one of the foremost examples of businesses partnering up with school districts. And the ability then of a student to be able to go at Russell County High School to work X number of hours a week, to get that hands-on training, to be able to come out with a certificate program to go right into the workforce. We know that not every student needs and has to go to college, and sometimes we have that myth. I'm all for students going to college that can afford to go to college, that want to go to college, that have that opportunity to do so. But we also have to do a much better job of capturing that student at the 8th grade and freshman year to find them a track to go into. Once they get to the junior and senior year, we've lost that student. We have to capture them early to be able to find a pathway that's best for them. As a college professor, I've seen many of those first-generational college students and others that come in a freshman American government class of mine, and I see them there for about 3 or 4 weeks into the semester, and they're just kind of glazed over. They got the syllabus in hand, but they don't know what to do with that syllabus, and they get lost in the shuffle. And I try to catch them at that early time. I say, you know what, we really need to work this. We need to focus on some things here. And I ask, what do you want out of this? And they go, I just don't know. Someone told me I had to be here, but I don't know why I'm actually here. And it's a lot of times that student stays about 3 semesters and they go back home. But we've got to make it to where there's pathways for each student and the opportunities there for them to go into. Now, there's been a myth in the workforce for so many years that we can't take that student in high school because of workers' comp issue, or there's some type of issue there that we can't bring them into a factory setting or that business setting. We are moving past that. I've seen more and more companies now that are partnering up with their local school districts. We've got money that's being devoted now to work-ready scholarships to try to get students the opportunity there, whatever the training may be, if it's welding, if it's logistics, if it's coding, if it's programming, whatever the model may be, that's what we're working on. And I think that's where Senate Bill 1, we were able to sell that partnership to be able to work there at that local level of school districts to find out what's the best innovative model that works best for schools.
Thank you, Senator. And lastly, we have Dr. Aaron Thompson, and based on our discussions last night, we did this very much on purpose to put you last, but we're looking forward to your commentary as well. Higher education is both the means and the end to our education goals as a state. How can Kentucky's colleges and universities support the quality of education system from early childhood forward and increase their own performance to ultimately raise educational attainment in Kentucky?
Thanks, Clay. First of all, thank you for what you do. It's important that we have the conversation that we're having today with people that I would argue is very much part of the choir. And what we've done so long is that we've sung the tune, but we haven't done it in unison, so our melody didn't really sound that good. And the report just challenges me, inspires me to do what I can do from my vantage point to make sure that we do exactly that. We can talk about pathways and pipelines, and I want to do that. I want to tell you also that I think higher education is the solution, but not the only solution. But we have to take our role seriously as we have this conversation and as we target what we need to do. And let me just be clear, data tells us a lot, and it's telling us that we've had some improvements and in some areas we haven't. What I know is that we have to look at the targeted elements and we have to disrupt the process that we've done in the past. When I look at what we've done, whether it's in high school graduation or getting more kids to college and getting them through college, we have done a terrible job with helping those that are most disenfranchised. When we talk about funding and education, we look at those institutional elements that take our funding, such as Medicaid, pensions, and so on, without realizing that education is a direct, we'll throw prisons in there too, is the direct solution to a lot of those issues. We talk about what we need to do at teachers, whether it's good policy, but what we know is that if we have an educational system, teacher prep or professional development, that doesn't target what the teacher needs in order to improve that classroom learning and out of the classroom learning, by the way, which is as powerful as in-classroom learning, then we haven't done our job. What we know is that if you don't include all the partnerships that need to be at the table, and I see the students come in just at the right time. I mean, when we're having conversations about students, get students there. When we're having conversations about preparing our students for the workforce, get the workforce and industry on the front end of this conversation, not on the back end of the conversation. When we talk about partnerships, this is about Prichard, P12, higher education, all of us saying that if we're going to make impact, true impact that changes the paradigm, we're going to have to know exactly the kind of impact we want and what we're going to do to it. It's important, I guess, for me to say this from a higher education viewpoint, that we are no more or no less what you guys can help us to be. We've got to talk about putting the value back in the value proposition. We have so many of our kids, I go to a lot of school districts and talk with them, we have so many of our kids that really don't understand the value of education, not just higher education, but P12 education. We talk about transitions where we lose kids, but are we really targeting those areas with a complete targeted plan? Are we talking about pathways that are intentional? We have dual credit. How are we using those dual credit programs to get students in a place that they feel like they can become a part of the solution and not, in fact, get lost in the problem? So my argument is that higher education, this is what we're going to be pushing hard, is that all of our partners up here on stage and out there has to be singing from the same hymnal, but we've got to sing better. And we've got to do more than just singing. We've got to actually put in action plans that matter.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Thank Thank each of you for your time, for your input. Sadiqa, you have-
Can I just say one thing? Because I know you all are going to talk a lot about community engagement while you're here, and I think it's important. But I want to be clear about my background. No one in my family had graduated, had gone to college. My mother was engaged with me as a parent. She was divorced, and so she worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, right? So please don't leave this conference thinking that we can put it all on parent engagement and community engagement. If we were running a company and it were producing numbers like this, we would do something about the leadership in that company. We would push for better results. So parents cannot do what they don't know. And so I think it's important for us, we do have to recognize we've got to get out of our silos, and there is a drug addiction issue. There has been a long time in urban America, and now we understand that it is throughout our state and certainly throughout the country. But we should not simply point the finger to parents and say, this is about them. This is really about broken systems. And that's what we have to make sure, I think, that we focus on. Certainly that is the position of the Urban League. Parents will do what they can, where they can, and we will judge them maybe, or maybe we won't. Maybe it will be sufficient, or maybe it won't. But the system that you and I have some control over, that is what we need to push on at this point. One parent changing how they do a certain thing is going to change the life of a child. We are here about a system. Thank you.
I want to thank each of you for your time and your input. We're looking forward to today and learning as much as we can. This has been a great opportunity. So I want to welcome Brigitte back to the stage. Thank you again.
So thank you, Clay, and thank you to our panelists again for being here this morning, taking time out of your schedule on the observance of Veterans Day to be with us to respond to the report. I think Dr. Thompson talked about partnerships, and that is exactly what we think we need to do to move forward. And community engagement for us, Sadiqa, thank you for underscoring, is about citizens in this state being mobilized to push for change at the local level that is oftentimes about system change to ensure that we're serving each and every student better. So to wrap us up on the report, and then we'll have a little bit of time for some questions. To pick up the pace once again, the committee's agenda for immediate progress includes the following: increasing state investments in quality early childhood programs, stabilizing the policy environment to address the unintended consequences of wasted time and resources created by continual policy changes, assuring proficiency in reading and math for each and every student by 3rd grade, supporting teachers to ensure effective classroom instruction, ensuring a high school diploma that is meaningful for students, families, employers, and communities, improving students' transition into post-secondary education and addressing challenges to affordability. And lastly, engaging citizens at the community level to be champions for high expectations and adequate supports so all students have the opportunity to excel. To support this type of citizen engagement beginning in early 2019, the committee will create and distribute community profiles for each and every county in the state. These profiles will include specific data on districts' education performance for all students and different student groups. They will also be accompanied by a toolkit that citizens can use to guide positive change at the local level. And later today, part of our meeting will be training on that on that profile and that toolkit. So we're committed to equipping citizens to be part of our forward progress. And we ask that all of you here today be part of that with us. Everything that I've shared with you just now comes out of the strategic plan that this committee approved last year. And a key piece of that strategic plan is increasing the number of champions across the state for better education. So we'd like to see 1,000 individuals across this state by the end of 2020 who are committed to working with the Prichard Committee in moving these indicators forward with an ever-quickened pace. And we'll ask that all of you help us achieve that goal of 1,000 by the end of 2020. We also commit to providing regular updates, as we have over the last decade, to the Commonwealth on education progress and challenges to ensure both the public and policymakers are kept up to date on critical developments. So watch for that from us on a regular basis and hold us accountable for that. So with that, I'd like to ask if there are any questions about the report that we can answer, or any questions for our panelists this morning. Dot Ridings? I think you can.
I would love to hear what the panelists have to say about the alarming drop in preschool enrollment that's taken place. It is the worst on our charts. And why?
I think there's several points that need to be made. First of all, you can't start this conversation about educational partnerships without thinking about how you develop not only a programmatic, but a process of getting kids engaged, not only in the home, but in good preschool. And we've seen the data on the effects of private preschool as well as public preschool. But I think one of the things that we haven't done very well, to be honest with you, to answer your question, we haven't talked about education in a holistic way. We haven't talked about education in what I consider a whole student way. And so a part of what we have to argue, whether I'm representing higher education or not, is the value of getting a good preschool education, the value of getting parent education as a part of the process. So what we know is that parents that aren't engaged or understand the value of preschool, in fact, they don't go or they don't get engaged with that preschool process. The other item too is that it takes our institutions who tend to have more resources than others, not enough resources, I know, but arguing and engaging with those in the community and starting and evaluating and inputting their resources and making sure that we have not only the communication about the value of preschool, but the value of having a good preschool and the value that it has on those populations that are in fact the most need of those good programs. So part of it to me is about communication. The part is also about having all of us have an elevator speech around this in every setting that we're in. And when we're looking at the drop, you'll find that the biggest connection is a lack of communication and conversation around the value of preschool.
And I would say access. Access, I know in Jefferson County, I mean, I don't ever remember there being space. When my children were in preschool, you'd have to search around. Access is huge. If there aren't enough spaces, there aren't enough slots, you can't have the numbers. So if you don't have the investment that you need in order to make it available to everyone, it doesn't even matter if they know about it. If they don't get there in time, they're not going to be able to get their young people in. And I agree with the comments that were made as well, but I think access is tremendously important. So we should look at, just like we count hospital beds, we need to count seats in preschools, and I think Kentucky has to move toward mandatory preschool for all. You can't look at the data and see how much that improves educational outcomes and continue to disregard that. So that has to be one of our goals.
This is also an area, Dot, where we need targeted innovation. And it's in part about Kentucky having somewhat of an antiquated model when it comes to preschool access, and needing to push out to greater partnerships between public and private providers that provide a preschool experience for young people that is fitting for the needs of a working family. And our preschool model today, as you know, is half-day, requires significant investment on the part of families and the community to access that benefit. So we need to think through the systemic barriers that create access issues. Other questions? I'm going to try not to micromanage from the microphone here and let Perry choose.
Thank you. As a parent and an advocate, I do want to echo your comments, Sadiqa, and also to urge you to consider that data does not tell the entire story. And in fact, we're lacking a lot of the granular data that I feel is so very important. Just to give you one example, although our students with disabilities have access to many terrific resources, in many schools that I visit, students with disabilities are segregated. They are eating lunch by themselves, they are isolated in hallways, they are separated, and the message that we are sending to not only these students, but their peers when they are doing things like cleaning all of the tables in the lunchroom, not just their own, which of course is a good thing to request of them, but everyone's, is that you are capable only of this work, this is your future, and we're telling their peers, this is what you should in fact be looking to these people for. So I am urging that we really also examine, Brigitte, what you just said. I don't think we have to wait to innovate. I also think that although we do need more investment, not everything requires that. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we could be looking at, and we need to look at compliance not as merely the expectation as it is now, but it cannot any longer be the destination. So my question to policymakers is, how can parents and advocates really raise our voices in a way that will help you see and hear the stories of real families, real people, and real students who desperately want to be not only coming through the door, but having a seat at the table in the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I completely agree with you on your points that you're making. I think a lot of it also is starting at the local level of site-based members, school boards, making sure your voice is heard at those. We have many times the Prichard Committee will have events, I know, in Frankfurt in terms of the student voice team and others that come up there. They will come, I know, to my office, I think, with every legislator and try to lobby and talk about issues and those same things. I think public town halls. I'm a very transparent legislator. I've just elected my second term. I host town halls twice a year. I'm not saying all of my colleagues do that. I wish more would. But those are the opportunities there when we go out into our communities to listen to those concerns. And that's a shame on our part if you have a legislator that's not hosting those before or after a legislative session. I think those are key opportunities there to listen to advocates. The same thing about the opportunities. There's no way that if a constituent contacts me with now social media, with Facebook, Twitter, you name whatever thing that's out there, that we should not be responding back to any parent that wants to sit down and have coffee with us or respond back to an email. And I greatly appreciate your comments, and you're exactly right on those students with certain needs. And you're exactly right. Thank you.
David?
Thanks. And I hate to be Debbie Downer, but, and I apologize for missing yesterday. You may have covered this, but I don't hear, with the exception of Sadiqa, a sense of urgency about this data. And data isn't everything, I get it. But this is appalling. And the younger you look at 8th grade and 4th grade data, you look at pre-K, and you look at college funding, those are the areas, that's where all the seed corn is. And we're going backwards. So again, I hate to be the voice of the Jeremiah here, but I want to just tell you something from my perspective on the Humana board. Humana just announced that it is opening a data analytics center with 300 very high-paid jobs in Boston. And I want to tell you that Louisville, Kentucky didn't even get on the list of imaginable consideration. And that's a direct result of two things. One is size, and we're not big enough. That's a problem, but that's a statewide problem. We don't have very many people. We got to use the people we have. And the other is for companies, and most companies are this way, I believe now, that are devoted to having a diverse workforce and a diverse management team, you can't build that given the racial equity gaps we've got coming out of our public school system. This is a big problem here, and we've got to have policy responses and legislative responses. Changing the measuring stick 3 times in a decade is not what this is about.
I do want to respond to that because I think this is at least important for me to say. I mean, the sense of urgency is so there, and if you look at over any length of time you want to name, we have raised our voices so loud with a sense of urgency. My argument is now it's time to do something about it. And I'm not saying we haven't tried to do something about it. My argument is let's take those data, those analytics, let's target what the real issues are. We talk about it all the time. You talk about how granular we're going to get with it. We can get as granular as you like. But bottom line, it's going to take actionable items with all of us, even if we don't fully agree from our vantage points wherever we're at about how to approach it. We've got to do something about it. So the idea, and let me be clear, I don't talk about my background very much in this sort of setting, but I do in a lot of other settings. You know, me getting a college education, me getting a high school education changed the trajectory of the generations that came after me. And the only way that happened was through a lot of disruption. And a lot of it had to do with race, a lot of it had to do with good schools, a lot of it had to do with those things that people were willing to put forth their efforts and lives to make happen. So I think you're right. The sense of urgency has to happen more than us just raising our voice. It has to happen in a way that we have some concrete processes that we're willing to put in place, give it the longitudinal time it takes to work, and continuously look at improving it in a very formative sort of way. So I wanted to second that in order for us to do what we need to do, we better not just raise our voices, but we better get our hands dirty to that degree.
Mary Gwen.
I just want to add on. I can shout. So I'm obviously going to go out to the post-secondary and all of these things on the okay. You know, not everybody needs to go to college, but a heck of a lot more people need to go to college. And we know that all these things that are listed here as the payoff for an education come from education beyond high school. And that's so critical. And we have made improvements in that. We've seen the post-secondary graduation rate go up. We've got attainment going up, but very slowly. And at the same time, the other thing, Dot, that is a steep decline is spending. And, you know, the investment in post-secondary is going to be critical. We're one of the few states in the country that has not started reinvesting since 2008. So, you know, it's going to require investment. So my real question is, how do we change the conversation? Because we've done the things that we needed to. We've got performance funding in, so you can't say, you know, we're not being cost effective. So, but we really must change that trajectory. How do we change that conversation?
It's a great question, and you're exactly right on the post-secondary funding model that we've gone forth, and I know Dr. Thompson was heavily involved in that when Senator Gibbons was taking the lead to change that formula for the way we go. And I think you touched on this earlier, Aaron, and I apologize. We educate, we incarcerate, and we medicate. Those three things drive our state budget. And unfortunately, when we have overcrowding of prison population, we've got money right now where our jails we just can't afford in many of these counties of what we're doing. We've got a medication problem with a Medicaid issue. We've got a drug problem. We've got so many things. And before I got in the legislature, it was easier for me to say, money needs to go here. We need to divert here and here. We have cut the state budget to the bare bone. We have done everything we can. We, this last session, passed a tax reform measure, which was not comprehensive tax reform. We've got to go back at that again and find where can we do comprehensive tax reform that can divert monies to education. Teacher salaries increase. I'm all for that. But we have got to look at the entire state budget, and education drives over 60% of the state budget. But we have to do a better job in this state because we've got so many other pressing issues. If this was a conference here with social workers, they'd be saying the same things, or if it's a topic of this or whatever it is. But we have to do a much better job when it comes to our resources and diverting attention to those problems. I completely agree with you. And please don't take, when I was talking about the students going to college, I'm all for it. Just like you, my wife's a first-generational college student. college, dental school, residency, successful pediatric dentist. I'm all for students to do that. But I fear of those students that are told you must go, and they get there and they're not on that pathway. We're trying to support as a college advisor, as a mentor. I try to help that student find that pathway to get there. But we have also, when we get into the state budget as a member of A&R, it is the toughest thing I've ever seen. Of so many good quality education programs that we've also got, that unfortunately right now we're seeing, cuts being made to those. We've got to be careful with what we're doing.
I think we've got to spend like these are our children. I think that all of us probably left our houses this morning and went into a garage. Maybe we didn't even know what the temperature was. We don't know if it's raining or not. We have the luxury of that. We have the privilege of that. And I think sometimes we legislate from a place of privilege. And what we need to do is think about legislating and spending for the least of these. Because if we cannot educate our young people, we are in so much trouble, and that's what we're seeing. So to your point, we educate, we incarcerate. The reason the incarceration rate is what it is because you have all of these people who have been so left out of the process of opportunity, of the hope. And so how do we really, the only way to change the conversation is for people who have the ability to create the policy to consider if it were their child. Don't legislate from a place of they have what I have. And I think that is something that I cannot seem to get people away from. You've got to be able, and it is a sense of just in someone else's shoes, because there are a lot of young people who are really being left behind, and we keep thinking somehow that that doesn't impact us because we're all fine. And that's just not so. And I know it's not something that's in the forefront of our minds, but I think it is there, and it impacts how we do. We all have our biases. We just do. And it comes across in our policy making and in our spending. If you want to see how much people love something, look at what they're spending on.
Mary Gwen, I have to answer your question as the higher ed guy here, right? I mean, first of all, thank you. You're right. We don't have good economic development unless we have a good higher education system. It's not a chicken versus egg. We're not going to get businesses to come and invest in us unless we have the population that are educated, that they believe that they can buy into. The second thing is that we need to set up pathways early. When I think of higher education, I don't think of it just happening when they get out of high school. I think of it happening in preschool. And so the idea that we need to be targeting, putting people not on a track toward not success, but on a track to understand exactly what they can do at each and every point until they get to that end goal. And it has to be a post-secondary certificate. It doesn't have to be a 4-year degree. It doesn't even have to be a 2-year degree. But it has to be something that they know is valuable enough to get them where they want. We're going to have to think of higher education as a solution and not a problem. And we have to do this, and Senator Wise and I get along very well, and we talk about this all the time. How do we set up good public policy in a way that we can target the things that we really want? We do have performance funding, but that by itself doesn't get us to your argument. And so it's going to take much more of a concentrated effort. And we can't do it without educating our most disenfranchised populations, or low income, or students of color. We just can't talk about how well we've done in higher education if we're leaving people behind and somehow think that aggregate number tells us that we're doing well. So for me, it's about us looking at all those different pieces, and with or without funding, trying to direct ourselves in such a way that we get to that place that we argue we need to be to. Thank you.
And can I just say this? I'm sorry, I know there are other questions. We have an obligation to have the same conversation in every room. You cannot change your responses based on who is asking the question, whoever it is. And I think that's really important because we are so pliable, and there just got to be some things that we just stand on as a state, as a Commonwealth, to just move us forward. I think that is a tremendous, what I do love about, if there's something to love about the White House right now, it is just whatever the room, whatever the space, I'm just going to say what it is, that I believe. And I think that is very, very important for purposes of accountability. We are not pushing hard enough in Kentucky on the accountability side as it relates to educating our children, and we all have to do that.
And I'm going to
Last
say one thing before the next question. I apologize. But I think sometimes if we're really talking about equity or inequity, we lose that conversation because we look at averages. And one of the things I appreciate about what you're doing with the county profiles is looking at a particular community. Where we live, we know since the year 2000, we have lost over 14,000 students in our K-12 community. 14,000 fewer children are enrolled there than there were in 2000. That makes a big difference because we are rural, we have limited access. It's very difficult for our parents to get their kids to a daycare center because they simply do not have transportation in many cases. There is a culture in the last few years that has evolved that people are more hesitant to be engaged in that. But what it really comes down to for me is that systems approach. How do we get all the right people in the room focused on what the issue really is, what is that problem that we need to be able to address? And how can school or higher ed or local government or state government be the catalytic driver to make that happen? What our interest is to create urgency so that we all know that we are, in many cases, at least in my region, like frogs in tepid water, and it is boiling. And pretty soon the pot is going to boil over, and we will have no option unless we reinvent our community except to move somewhere else. And I don't want to do that. So for us, it's about systems design and bringing everybody together with that sense of urgency. I apologize for that.
Jeff, thank you. And that could not have been a better comment to wrap up this session of our day on. When we'll be asking you repeatedly throughout the day, you've heard the new data. You see the new report. You know how long the committee has been at this work. You know that this report started in 2008, and we've not only hit a plateau, but we're beginning to decline. So as a group of individuals committed to being mobilized across this state to increase the quality of education, we're going to repeatedly ask you today, what are you willing to do when you leave this room later today? And how can we support you in doing that? Whether it's taking the profile into your community and having a conversation, whether it's us helping you draft an op-ed and getting it in your local paper, whether it's bringing people together around coffee in your home community to talk about this, to get the data in front of folks, to raise awareness and create a sense of urgency. We want to know what you're willing to do when you leave the room today and who you're willing to bring with you so we can hit that 1,000 goal by the end of 2020, and we can, to David's point, ensure that we've created a sense of renewed energy, an even greater commitment to urgency in the next couple years that will put us on a path of exceptional progress going forward. So with that, I'm going to invite Bill back up to the stage, and please join me in thanking our panelists again.